Welcome to Rising Woman Leaders. I'm your host, Meredith Rom, and I believe the time has come for women to share their gifts, their voice, and their stories. I love seeing women spiritually and financially empowered, thriving in their life's work, and doing what they love every day. I've gathered a community of women living their dreams to tell us their stories and inspire us to step into more courage, self-love, and feminine leadership. If you like this podcast, follow me on Instagram at Rising Woman Leaders and sign up for email updates at risingwomanleaders.com. Now get cozy with a journal and a cup of tea. I hope you enjoy today's show. Today, I'm sharing with you an episode of a podcast where I was actually the one being interviewed. It was with Meg Berryman of the Beyond Being Well podcast. Definitely take some time to check out her podcast. It's on iTunes and all the places. We had such a sweet conversation where I shared my story of rising into leadership, how I moved from New York City to California, following my intuition, beginning to take courageous steps. She asked me what leadership means to me, the journey of writing my book. I share lots of tips on birthing your own big dreams. And we also talk about the archetype of the queen and upleveling in your life and your business using the qualities of the queen energy. I hope this information is of service to you and everything you're creating in your life right now. Again, definitely take some time to check out Meg and all that she is creating. I'm so honored to have had this conversation with her and to get to share it with you all today. Meredith Rom, welcome to the podcast. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Meg.
It's so lovely to have you on the show. And just by way of introducing how I came across your work to our listeners, I've been listening to your podcast for a while, and I think I was drawn to it mainly for the name, because Rising Women Leaders, it's so evocative, and it's women's leadership and also spirituality is something that I'm really into. It's my jam. So I was drawn to the kind of name, but then I started listening and seeing your presence online more and felt really drawn to you. And I think your message and your background is really similar to mine, but really you bring such a unique take to the space, and your energy is really one that's really grounded and centered, and I think it's really beautiful what you're doing in the world. So we haven't met in person, but we'll put it out to the universe that maybe one day that will happen. I wanted to start by asking you the question that I ask all my podcast guests, and that is, what is the change you want to see in the world, and what do you see your part in that being?
Yeah, what first comes to mind is union and balance between the feminine and the masculine energies. And I feel our culture for a very long time has been really in that more masculine doing, achieving, all the energies related to that can be pretty detrimental when there's not the balance of the feminine. Because the feminine is all about resting and receiving, allowing, accepting, holding. And when we think about what's happening to Mother Earth right now, it's this energy that's so out of balance of being in the masculine, of being in the focusing on the achievement and the money and the things that need to happen without really looking at what we're doing to our planet. And so I really believe that when we look within and we start healing within and finding our own balance and our inner union within, that's going to reflect on our culture and our society and the world and our systems and how we're treating the earth. And there's going to be this huge shift. And I feel like it's happening. It is happening. More and more people are waking up to this. We're being having to be patient in it. And I feel like my part is helping people do the inner healing work, helping people heal their own traumas, heal the parts of themselves that don't feel worthy, or the parts of themselves where they feel like they have to push and force and make things happen, and to come back more into that inner union and that balance. Because when we are fully whole and integrated within ourselves, then we're going to naturally be reflecting that in the people around us and the ways that we treat the earth. So that's what came to mind first. And of course, there are other things that I love supporting women with. But when I think of the bigger picture and why I do this work, it's that devotion to the rising feminine. It's that devotion to us all coming into that inner balance and wholeness.
I love that so much. And it brings me to my knees when I remember what we're doing here and how important it is, and when you frame it so beautifully like that. I love what you said about patience and how it's taking time, but it's happening, and I feel the same. But it's like sometimes we expect change to happen like overnight, and this is intergenerational like change. This is a long time coming, and it's not going to happen overnight. And so I really thank you for that reminder that sometimes we just need to trust and have faith a little bit that it is happening. Meredith, I'm really interested to hear like how you came to this work, and whether you had your own internal kind of rebalancing and awakening of the feminine, and whether you could share with the listeners just whatever you feel called to about that journey this morning.
Yes, I did. And I wasn't even thinking of it in this context, but it was very much that out of balance place within myself. So as many people do, I grew up going to school, getting into college, and then thinking that when I got out of college, I would get a good job and I would just continue in that system and have a family and buy a house and do all the things that were kind of laid out for me in my society and what I saw my parents and all the people around me doing. So when I got through college, I was at the end of college in my last year and really starting to ask what was next. A few things started happening, and the first was that I started having a lot of chronic pain in my body, and that would look like headaches and jaw tension, and even this muscle tightness pain that would go down one whole side of my body. Generally, it would be on the right side, which interestingly, it's related to the masculine. And I went to a great college. I was at NYU in New York City. And the culture there was very much, especially New York City, was staying up late, drinking coffee, like studying for tests, partying on the weekends, all of that I was immersed in. And when I would start to feel that out of balance place, or like there was emotions that I had to feel, often I would go to numbing them out. So my drug of choice at that time was sugar. And so I would just go to like having the ice cream and the desserts and all the things that actually were really not good for my body. And I started getting really out of balance. I started getting acne, and that led to me feeling really insecure. The body pain and the jaw tension, I think, was also really related to not fully expressing myself, not fully being on my creative path. And at that time, I felt really afraid, really, really afraid of sharing my voice. Like to the point of even being in a small classroom, the thought of introducing myself would just be terrifying. And my chest would constrict, and I'd feel like I wouldn't have the words. And there was just all this inner sense of wanting to hide, wanting to escape, and not really being able to be honest about that or having a community to turn to at that time. And at the same time, I was asking a lot of questions because here I was like following everything to a T, getting, about to graduate from college, and it was 2010. So it was the economic downturn time. And there were a lot of places that were just simply not hiring. And so when I was going out into the world and applying for jobs, nothing was coming through. And that, again, reflected on what's wrong with me. Am I not enough? All of those beliefs and fears were coming up. And at that time, what really started to shift for me was, one, I feel like my body was giving me signals. It was like something is out of balance here. Something needs to shift. What's really at the root? And I had a friend take me to my first yoga class. And in that yoga class, I remember being in pigeon pose and feeling like that class was so hard. Every pose, it was just like, oh my God, there's so much intensity in my body. Really, can I go there? But for the first time, hearing the teacher say, breathe into the sensation, allow yourself to go into the feeling, I started to breathe there and to feel it. And I can remember that pigeon pose of my first time, like really not trying to escape my body anymore or to escape my pain or my insecurity, but to go into the physical discomfort that I was feeling and to hold myself there and to not have to change it and to not have to fix it. And that, I think, really was actually my first experience with the feminine, knowing what the feminine was, the holding, the loving, the accepting, without that need to fix or change. And it was through that space that I began to heal, that I began to open up into relief in my body. And having that little bit of relief in my body began to lead to discovering my intuition. And I think in our culture, one of these things that's out of balance is that we are so quick to numb ourselves, whether that's through alcohol, through drugs, through prescription pills, through sugar, through watching television, or any of the things that social media that can take us away from our experience. So going into the feeling was really what opened up that space of my intuition. And I started going back to yoga again and again, and just knowing that that was going to be my new medicine, because at the time I had been going to doctors and trying to figure out what was happening in my body, and they couldn't find anything to put their finger on of what was happening. All the MRIs and the tests came back normal. So their suggestion was maybe try muscle relaxants or antidepressants or painkillers. And I tried those a little bit at the beginning, but quickly felt like this isn't helping. This isn't getting at the root here. And I threw those away and started going to my yoga practice. And it was in the yoga room, lying in Shavasana, that I started to have these new visions of my life. And I thought, wow, this is the first time in my life no one is telling me what to do. I have complete and total freedom. I have some money saved up from gifts from graduating, and I had a part-time job at that time. So I was like, I could go anywhere. I could do anything. And I really think it was taking that space to connect to my intuition to even get to that place, but then to also, when I started to tell people about my ideas, because the first idea that came was move to California, try something totally new, go to San Francisco. And my mom had gone to college on the West Coast, and so I had heard stories from her. It was always in the back of my mind as this dream that I would love to experience. So I opened up to that dream and started sharing about it. And my roommate at the time was like, yeah, go for it. You know, what's the worst that could happen? You go out there, maybe get a sublet for a month, and if you don't like it, you can always come home. And so that's what I did. I found a place to live in San Francisco. I knew I could at least live out there for a month while I figured out what was next. And I found this artist collective in the Mission. And I remember being on that airplane with my one-way ticket, my one suitcase packed, and just feeling so free. Like the first time of my life, really feeling like I am making my own choices. I'm not a victim to my circumstances. I can go anywhere, do anything that I want, and really started to believe in that. It was 10 days after being in San Francisco that a man came up to me in a park and said, I don't know why I feel the need to tell you this, but I'm going to see a saint this weekend. Her name is Amma. She's a guru from India. She travels around the world giving people hugs. And if you have any inclination to go, I feel like it could be really amazing for you. And I was just like, what is this? This doesn't happen to me. Or this random stranger coming up in the park. But something inside was just like, listen, there's something here for you. And I had already been really curious about my spiritual path and studying yoga and curious about maybe going to India at some point. And I decided to go. And I remember going to this temple in the East Bay and walking in and feeling the sense of the chai and the sounds of the singing and the people that were celebrating. And it was just like this big wake up that this is what spirituality is for me. This celebration, seeing spirituality as this community and joy and love, and this teacher up on the stage giving people hugs. It was just so different from what I had grown up with in a more Christian church upbringing. And I had my hug that night, a beautiful experience of presence and devotion. And in the months that came after that, I really felt called to become a yoga teacher and then to travel to India. And I did go to India. I was there for 6 months. The first place that I went to was Amma's ashram in the south. I stayed there for a month and practiced seva and yoga and selfless service, and was studying and was able to meet other spiritual teachers on my journey. But when I came back, it felt like the next big step for me was to write a book about what I had learned during that time. The journey of listening to my intuition, taking those courageous steps. So that's a little bit of where I've been and how I came to be here. And after being in India, and it took 7 years to go from the idea of the book to completion, but it was published in 2017. And during those 7 years, I also had to figure out making money and starting my own business and figuring out a way that I could be of service in the world through sharing the teachings that were so important to me. And I was able to do through becoming a coach, through leading workshops and women's circles and retreats. And that's what I've been doing, starting the podcast, all of that for the last, 7 or 8 years now.
Thank you for sharing. It's like there's so much similarities in the heroine's journey, isn't there? Like it's like we all have these symptoms and then the initiations and then the coming out the other side, clients and friends and peers, like we've all been through the really similar but also really personalized like ring of fire in a way. And I just love the color and depth that you shared there, because there's so many aspects to it which you highlighted, like the time, like 7 years. It's not something that these things, again, they don't change overnight necessarily. But what really struck a chord, and I want to go deeper on, is this idea of leadership and service, because that's what I think a lot of my listeners are feeling called to bring out of themselves or to recognize in themselves, I guess, and express in the world. So what do you think a leader is to you? Like, what does leadership mean to you now, having been on that journey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is one who is willing to be of the highest service, because in a lot of ways, being a leader is very vulnerable. It's so vulnerable to put yourself out there and to be the face of something, and to stand for your beliefs, and to potentially put yourself out there for projection and attack and all the things that can happen to our leaders. I mean, look at what happens in the US, at least, when someone runs for president. It's just like crazy, the amount of projection and attack and, mean things that are said about the people that really step up to lead. And so I think first and foremost, it is one who has a deep, deep calling to serve, and that there is something they see in the world that they themselves feel like there's something unique to them that they can give back and help. And it's those moments of when we actually help someone in that it's like that makes it all worth it. And I also am seeing the more that that I believe that it's safe, like that other stuff doesn't really come as much, like the projection and, the other things that can be hard about leadership. But also it can, when you care so much about the vision and the world you want to create, it doesn't affect you as much. You learn to let that go, to let that slide off your shoulders. So a simple definition I would use is just one who feels called to serve, one who is connected to a vision and a dream, something bigger than themselves that they want to be in devotion to, and that they're willing to stand up for and to be a teacher for, and to give back to others who are maybe feeling lost or need support along the way.
And I think that if you take that definition, like, we all have a vision, but there's varying degrees of how we've been separated from it, or there's varying degrees of, I think, what we believe we're capable of contributing to in that vision. And so, like, from where I sit, I feel like we're all leaders in some way. It's just that part may not have been expressed. And I think sometimes maybe talking about feminine leadership, and I know you've done like some archetypal work as well, can help women leaders particularly understand that leadership doesn't necessarily look like what we see on the television necessarily, right? It can, but there's this whole other realm of like feminine gifts that we can bring to leadership. Do you want to expand a little bit on like what comes to mind when I'm talking about that more feminine leadership? Yeah, I mean, one thing that came to mind was a mother being there for her child or her children. That is leadership, being there to serve and to create and to teach with those that are a little, for someone who's a little bit further along the path and can show the way. So it can take on so many forms. It can take on supporting friends. It can take on supporting your family. It could take on seeing something in your community that you want to create or give back in some way. And then feminine leadership, I think a lot of the ideal, what we see on TV and different things of what leadership might be is really different than the new paradigm that we're creating as women coming into their feminine leadership. And men too could also be coming more into this. And for me, that looks like really honoring self-care and knowing that that's important to be of service, and knowing when to rest, knowing how to fill yourself up
so that when you stand up to give and to lead, that you have a full cup. So there are different ways to think about that leadership. And I myself am a much more gentle person. And I remember when I first started teaching yoga, I had such a quiet voice. And at the same time, like that can really command attention too. It's like you don't have to be this masculine model of what it has to be a leader. I've made a huge impact just being myself and seeing like, wow, I actually don't have to become more masculine just to take the stand or the stage or the presence of other people. So it's really about being yourself and creating more space for those feminine qualities of allowing, being, and receiving, and the gentleness as well.
I love that. I love what you said about like being you. And that's like, that to me is a rebellious act of leadership these days, like particularly as women, to be us, to take up space, to command attention, you know, even if it's in a more introverted way or the expression is more introverted. It's really a courageous leadership act to be ourselves. I think that really, like, when it comes down to it, being a leader is often just being ourselves, and in doing so we give others permission to do that. I wanted to ask, I know you've been doing some work with the Queen archetype, and it kind of relates to this conversation. Are you able to share your journey with that archetype, and maybe for those who haven't worked with them, like what an archetype is and how it can help us to express those parts of ourselves?
Yeah. So archetypes are different embodiments that we can call into our own being. So an archetype could be anything from more general, like a mystic, or it could be very specific, like Isis or Mary Magdalene or Mother Mary. So those archetypes of beings who may have actually existed on Earth, but embody certain qualities that we can call upon for different needs that we may have in our life. So one of them that I have been working with is the archetype of the queen. And when we think of a queen, we probably imagine, you know, a woman on a throne with a crown. And what I really think about the queen that can support us is I see the queen as a woman who knows that she's powerful, and she says yes to her power, because when she does that, she knows she can be of such greater service to the people she is here to serve. So just in that helped me so much with my journey of being seen and heard and speaking up and giving workshops and giving talks, because that was really scary for me. But to realize that the intensity of feeling I might be feeling in my body beforehand is actually my power, and that the queen is one who says yes to that and uses that to fuel her mission, that totally turned it around for me. And to even call upon her, that quality, that embodiment, before I need to get up and teach a class or do something in my work that scares me or have a difficult conversation, I can really hold that energy. So I have 12 qualities of the queen. I'll just go ahead and share them now, of what I really see as this embodiment and how it's been helping me. The first is that she knows herself. She is sovereign, boundless, and free. The second is she is not afraid of her power. She knows she's powerful. She says yes to it. And then the third is she uses that power in service to her people. So some of the others are, she does not make herself small for others to feel comfortable. She's willing to be big, to take up space, and she uses that space to inspire and activate others. She knows what she stands for, and she lives in alignment and integrity with it. She values who she is, and she owns her unique brilliance. She knows that she is a piece of the puzzle and has something to give back. She also knows she's not perfect, and it's okay if she makes mistakes. She's willing to learn from those lessons. And she's also willing to take responsibility, to own up when she needs to, and also to forgive herself. She's not one to hold this grudge or guilt over herself or punish herself, but rather see where she wants to take responsibility and then to forgive herself and to move forward. She comes from a place of abundance rather than lack. She's willing to see and believe in an abundant world, and that can also really help with collaboration and seeing that there is enough for everyone. She practices fierce self-care. She takes supreme care of herself because from that place, she knows she will have so much more to give. And with that supreme self-care, she knows she also needs to hold boundaries around that and to be able to hold and to know her boundaries so that she is really filled up and can be of the highest service in the ways that she knows how to.
It's like when we can use archetypes or goddesses or whatever embodiment or collective group of qualities or attributes that we're working with or expressing or trying to illuminate at the time. It's like falling in love, and when you describe the queen, it's like I could just fall in love with that archetype, that expression and all of those qualities that you've shared. And I think that really sums up what we're describing as feminine leadership or as women leaders in the social space particularly. I'm really glad that you brought up this idea around self-care, because I feel like service, just the connotations around that word can be still so tied up in the projections of martyrdom and needing to be resourceless in order to serve others. And I'd love to hear how you practice that for yourself, including things you do outside the business and your work, which just bring you sheer joy and therefore energy and act as your forms of self-care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the first things that came to mind was honoring our worth. I think there's so many different facets of our own self-care and self-love and taking care of ourselves. But one of the things that came to mind was when I started a business and was just getting started, I didn't charge very much for my services, and realizing that over time, actually, in order to be of that highest service and to feel in integrity and to feel in alignment, that's one of the ways that we can really honor ourselves is charging our worth and being willing to hold firm to those boundaries and knowing that that we are valuable and that we have a lot to share. And the way that my life is set up right now is the clients that I'm seeing feels so good to show up fully for them because of that exchange. Mm-hmm. And also it supports me in a way where I don't need to be seeing 10 clients a day, 5 days a week. It's I have the space and the time to really honor the self-care and to practice what I preach. So that's one way that we can honor it. And then, of course, there are all the ways of just bubble baths and healthy food and the things that really nourish us and light us up. And one of the things I like to think about with self-care is romancing ourselves. Like, what would it look like to be in relationship with yourself and to want to court yourself and to be loving to yourself? And actually, I think self-care is a huge pathway to self-love. So if you know that you're someone that is having negative thoughts about yourself or being down on yourself, or sometimes just taking the really simple, tangible action steps of, I'm going to prepare a nice dinner for myself tonight, and I'm going to set the table and really take my time to eat it and enjoy every bite. And maybe I'm going to have some raspberries after, just because, like, something that just feels so indulgent and loving and beautiful. And then maybe I light some candles and have this luxurious bath before going to bed. And I imagine some people might think, oh gosh, I don't have the time for that. But it's really, that's the paradigm we're shifting. That service can be self-honoring. Service can be what lights ourselves up, and that we, when we have the energy to give to it. Something else just came to mind with service is sometimes I connect with people who are only receiving information, and they know they have things they want to share in the world, but they're scared to put it out there. And so instead, or maybe they have an idea that I don't have enough experience, or I don't have enough trainings, or I don't have, sometimes the biggest thing we can do for self-care is putting ourselves out there, being willing to be of service, or knowing that we only need to be a few steps ahead of the person that we want to help. So having a balance of how much we're inputting and how much we're outputting, so that there can be a sense of honoring our purpose, honoring our soul, honoring the mission that we came here to make. And, even just more ideas of self-care coming up, like our taking courageous steps is self-care. Like, it wasn't easy when I decided to make that shift to fly across the country. I needed to have support, and I needed to have a lot of faith. But like, when we receive the intuitive guidance, when we start listening to our bodies and feeling our feelings and receive the intuitive guidance, we have to follow through with the guidance that we're given. And that is sometimes scary, but it's really important in order to give back in the way that we want to. Yeah.
It's just so many things as you were talking, like, it's just so much truth. I think that listening to the intuitive guidance as a radical form of self-care, it just strikes me when you talk, like, how crazy it is that we have to teach ourselves how to be in relationship to ourselves and each other, and how we need to teach ourselves or reteach ourselves or remember how it is that we can listen. And it's almost like in that culture of consuming and doing, like, we've forgotten the importance of having that relationship with ourselves above and beyond the needs of others. And I think it's just, there's so much wisdom in sitting, like you said before, sitting in the discomfort and listening to that discomfort and feeling it, but using that as fuel and power, as opposed to thinking that feedback is a reason not to do it. Would you be able to expand on that a little, like that idea of feeling it, but using that as your power, like you did when you were going in to teach workshops, when you didn't feel really comfortable doing that? Like, how do people start to do that? Because they really feel like we need to clear up this misconception that those feelings mean we shouldn't do something.
Yeah, I've definitely struggled with that too, of like feeling afraid. I'm feeling afraid about something. Maybe that means I shouldn't do it. And So what I like to say when it comes to fear, if you're feeling afraid and a little bit of excitement, that means that you're ready. That means that go for it. If you're feeling total fear and terror about something, you might need some support before doing anything. You might need to really just be in that feminine, resting, loving, honoring space for a while. And that's totally okay. And when it comes to just discomfort, I think that the discomfort is where we find the most growth. And so when it comes to our body, like if we're having discomfort in our body, if we can hold ourselves in that discomfort and really be with it and not need to fix or change it and hold it, that is such beautiful medicine. And that might be exactly what we need to be that mother for ourselves. I love telling my clients, like, you're in charge here. You don't have to go any faster than is comfortable for you, and to go at your own pace. And I also work a lot with EFT tapping. So when we land on a fear or something that feels terrifying and uncomfortable and we don't know how to move ahead, we can use the tapping, which is it's a meridian system, little taps on different meridian points that can help tell the subconscious and the amygdala part of the brain that you're safe, it's okay, you can process this now, you can feel this, you can move the emotions. For example, I like to think of, like, when it comes to birthing our big dreams and the things we want to create in the world, that it should be easeful. It should be fun and exciting and joyful. And if we're coming against those edges that feel so hard and uncomfortable, and that there's usually a little girl inside, an inner child, who's putting the brakes on and is like, no way, don't make me go there. I'm not going. And so if you hold and love that part of yourself, and particularly I use the tapping a lot with that too, you can validate your feelings and where you're at and all the parts of you that are not on board, and you can learn from them and understand them. And then once that is more integrated, it will start to feel more easeful. I had a client last week who was given an opportunity to speak in front of a group just for a 2-minute to speak on a topic that was of interest to her. And all the alarm bells were going off inside. Don't do it, don't go. And even though she wanted to do it, she woke up the morning and said, I can't go. And in our session, we worked with the little girl inside who had decided at some point in her life that what I have to say doesn't matter, or I don't matter. And once we began to reframe that belief with the tapping and with this other modality, I use matrix reimprinting. When we finished that session, I was like, how do you feel about going up to speak now? And for her, it was just like, no problem. I'm so excited. I'm ready. So sometimes we need to slow down and really honor the parts of ourselves that need attention. And that goes with the pushing and the not pushing and forcing. So noticing when we are getting into a place of pushing and forcing and how that doesn't generally feel good. And to take that step back and to look, okay, what needs to be acknowledged here? What needs to be loved? What needs to be honored? And then there's this balance of the feminine and the masculine. And so when you go out to take a courageous step, you might have to have some trust and some faith. And like, there should be some excitement there. Yeah. You're probably a little bit excited of what that outcome will be of getting it up in front of that group. So once you're in that place, then it feels joyful. Then it feels loving and supportive to take that step.
It just, it's like that idea that there's so much more time, like there's time, and expanding into that notion of like time, and we don't have to be urgent, and there isn't this like drive, because one thing we know is that the soul's calling or your intuition or whatever you want to describe that as will keep coming, right? Like I remember in the early days of my business, and I'd be like all the things like railing against it, like I can't do this, and like, but I would keep coming back, right? Like I would keep coming back and keep coming back and keep sitting down and doing the work. And even though there was all this storm of stuff and projections and fears, the things that we keep coming back to, like the ideas and the concepts and the conversations, and like they're all just invitations. So whatever we don't work through at the time because we might not feel ready, or we don't have the modality or the support, or it's just not time, like it'll keep coming back. Is that your experience too?
Yes, that little tapping on the shoulder of here I am, I'm ready, like that thing that wants to be birthed through you, or that thing that is continuing to just tap on your shoulder lovingly, saying, I'm still here when you're ready. And this actually makes me think of a few tips that I like to give people when they're feeling scared about birthing their big dream, or the thing that they feel called to do, or the step they really wanted to take in the world. And sometimes I just suggest to people, because this really helped me when I was writing my book and thinking about birthing my book in the world. That felt super vulnerable. It was my memoir, my personal story. I knew I would have to be more in the public eye. I did a whole fundraising campaign. So there's just a lot of pieces that felt scary in the publishing process. So I came up with a few tips that really helped me through. And the first one was, and it was really about taking the pressure off, because the first one was, I simply desire to learn about this process. I'm curious to learn how to write a book, to just be in the learning journey, and like taking the pressure off of it needing to be this huge bestseller. But like, I'm just going to keep showing up with curiosity and learning in this journey. And how do you write a book? And approaching it from that place of wonder and curiosity. I kept coming back to, I long to honor this divinely guided idea that felt like it chose me and was asking me to birth it. So that was the tapping on the shoulder. That's why it took so many years. It was like I put it aside, I put it on the shelf. That's probably not going to happen, at least not now. But then it would come back again, tapping on the shoulder. Are you ready? And to me, that came to me through dreams. I actually had a dream where, after I had really given up on the idea of writing a book, where I opened a drawer and took a book out of the drawer and was flipping through the pages, and it was of a woman's travels, and I realized this was the book that I was supposed to write, and I didn't do it yet. And I woke up from that dream really committed and willing, and even though I had no idea how, I just like set a really clear intention to the universe. This is a divinely guided idea that has chosen me, and I want to follow it through. Please show up. Please, spirit, source, provide the resources I need. And then the third thing that really helped me was, if I could even help just one person through this, that would be enough. And to really take the pressure off of, like, if I write this book and I have a child one day and that child gets to read it, like, that's enough. And of course, the book ended up reaching many more hands and helping many more people. But when you come up against the fear and the self-doubt and the inner critic voices, to just tell yourself that, you know, this doesn't need to be that big thing. Even if you're just doing this for one person, who would that person be? How could you help them? Really takes the pressure off.
So much. I could just keep having this conversation all day, because there's so many things in what you say that are like operating on different levels, there's this depth as well there with all of the wisdom that you've shared that I could just keep diving into. But for our listeners who have time constraints and are moving on to something else, we're going to finish our conversation here. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing so openly your processes and your wisdom and your experiences and your leadership. I've really loved the conversation, and I would love you to share where people can find more about you and your book and your work in the world.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the book is called Just Be, A Search for Self-Love in India. And that is on Amazon. And you can either search for my name or the title of the book. And my website is my name, meredithrom.com. So people can read blog posts, find the podcast, all of that. And the podcast, it's on all the places where podcasts are found, and it's called Rising Woman Leaders. And there's so much amazing content and interviews and personal teachings that I share that are supportive for women stepping on this path, women coming into their courage and into their leadership in a way that is really honoring of the feminine.
Thank you so much. There is so much great content there, and aren't podcasts amazing? I just love the age that we get to live in. It's really phenomenal. Just to finish off, I always like to bring our attention back to what's going well, and I think it's this feminine, switch as well of not focusing on what we can fix or punish or move away from. So in your life, what's something that you're celebrating right now that's going really well or that feels really good?
Oh, so many things. I'll just choose one. My relationship is feeling really, really good. And I actually got married last September, and we're celebrating our 6-month wedding anniversary on the spring equinox. So it's just a couple days away, and that is feeling really nourishing and loving and supportive in my life. And we've definitely come up against our own edges in the 7 years that we've been together. And we have really taken relationship as a spiritual path and been willing to see the mirror, see the places in ourselves that wish to be loved and honored and to grow together. So that is something that I'm celebrating. And thank you for asking.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And I've been with my husband the same 7 years, and the edges and how they're pathways for growth. It's so profound. So thank you for bringing me back to that place of in the midst of child rearing, there is such beauty in consciously walking that path together. Meredith Rom, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and I really hope to connect again soon.
Thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to our show today. We would love to hear what you think. Take a moment to hop on over to iTunes and leave us a review. We'd be so grateful to receive it. Until next time, namaste.